I saved an Apache beauty. Now she says I can't leave. The rope creaked like a dying tree in the wind. A girl stood on the gallows plank, thrown across a cottonwood limb, wrists bound behind her back, black hair matted with dust. Moonlight cut her face in silver, high cheekbones, a turquoise bead glinting at her throat, and the noose kissed the bruise under her jaw. A dozen ranch hands ringed the clearing with rifles cocked, their boots crunching the frost-bitten grass. Somewhere out in the dark, coyotes yipped as if the wilderness itself held its breath. "Apache thief," the man in the black duster said, smoothing the scar that ran from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. "Name's Nalin, ain't it?" His voice sounded like gravel poured from a bucket. "You brought a world of trouble on yourself." Nalin's bare feet gripped the rough plank. She tried not to look at the dangling horse beneath her, the skittish bay whose reins were tied to the same branch as her fate. One slap, one word, and the horse would bolt. Cries rose from the men, bets, jokes, ugly words that pressed like hot iron against her skin. The lantern swung from the cottonwood and painted the men's faces in a buttery, hellish glow. The man in the duster stepped closer, breath sharp with whiskey. "My name is Conrad Pike. I built these ranches. I sunk the wells. I keep the peace when the army can't be bothered, and I'll not have my cattle bled dry and my fences cut." He tapped the noose with a gloved finger. It hummed against her throat. "You were prowling my creek at midnight, little ghost, spying for who?" Nalin didn't bow. She met his one good eye and said, "For no one who fears you." Pike smiled, small and mean. "We'll see." He raised a hand, a gust swept the clearing, cold as river stone, and the lantern flame snapped sideways. The bay tossed its head and nearly stepped off the plank. Nalin's chest hitched. She fought the panic roiling up her throat like smoke from green wood. Distant hoofbeats flickered in the wind, a dull drum from the gulch. A shape moved beyond the light, then stilled, a hat brim, a shadow that didn't belong to the trees. Pike's hand hovered in the air, the moment a knife's edge. "Last words?" he asked. Nalin drew in a thin breath, tasted rope and dust, and stared past him into the dark where that shadow waited. "Yes," she whispered. "Do you hear it?" Hoofbeats closer now, deliberate as a heartbeat. Every rifleman turned toward the sound, and something heavy slid into the clearing, a silence that felt like a held trigger. The bay snorted, the rope creaked, and the shadow stepped from the trees. Ezra Cole had seen worse nights, or so he liked to tell himself, but even he winced at the sight of the noose. He stood with his oilskin coat dripping moonlight and trail dust, hat brim low, grey in his beard like frost along a fence post. His horse Ash, a stony-eyed roan, breathed steam that drifted past the lantern glow. Ezra's right hand rested easy over the worn walnut grip of a Colt .44, and his left carried a scuffed doctor's satchel tied shut with a leather strap. "Evening," he said. Voice flat as a dry creek bed. Pike squinted. "You're a mile off the road, friend. Then I'll let my horse fire the mapmaker," Ezra said. His eyes slid to the noose. "How you're fixin' to hang a girl?" "A spy," Pike corrected. He gestured around them at the sprawled ranchland, at the hand-dug channels that funneled creek water to his alfalfa. "I've had fences cut 3 times this month, wells fouled with carcasses. Somebody's been driving my beeves off water at night. A war has a way of looking like theft when it's done slow." He nodded toward Nalin. She was crouched in the reeds with a knife. Nalin fought the urge to claw the rope from her neck. The fibers rubbed her skin raw, the knot pressing like a stone between her shoulder blades. 2 of Pike's men had stripped her of her doeskin jacket and torn the hem of her dress. Filth clung to the embroidered edge her mother had stitched. She swayed with the horse's restless weight and tried to keep her eyes on the silver coin of the moon, not on the faces below. "You dammed the creek," she said. "You fenced the only water left this side of Red Mesa. My people drink from that river, since before your cattle ever learned our grass. You call it yours because you hammered boards into it?" Her throat tightened. "My brother went to move the fence. He did not come back." A murmur ran through the ring of men, and Pike's jaw ticked. "Your brother put a bullet through my foreman's lung. He bled out coughing like a stove smoker. I sent your brother to the dirt for it." Nalin's vision swam. She thought of her brother's laugh, how he carved birds from cottonwood and gave them to children on feast days. She tightened her toes against the plank for balance and felt splinters bite. Her breath came shallow. The rope throbbed with her pulse. She would not beg these men for mercy. She would not give them the song of it. Pike turned to Ezra. You look like a man who can read a room. This is a private settling. You ride on. Ezra scratched the scar along his knuckles. I read the room, Mr. Pike, and I see a map drawn with rope. Pike's good eye hardened. He nodded to a hand at the bay's flank, a young man with freckles and a quivering mouth. Kick the plank! The boy's boot twitched. Nalin's breath stopped until Ezra's colt sounded like thunder. Ezra's bullet tore the lantern from the branch. Light spilled hard and yellow, then crashed into shadow. The clearing went black, but for a knife-edge moon and the silver sash of the creek. Men cursed, horses reared, rifles swept blind arcs. Ezra's second shot split the hemp above Nalin's head. The rope frayed, snapped with a whip crack, and fell around her shoulders like a dead snake. The bay bolted, plank clattering down, and her feet hit the cold dirt so hard she tasted copper. Get him! Pike roared and gunfire erupted. Ezra moved like water finding downhill. He stepped left as a shot hissed past his ear, rolled behind the cottonwood, and slid the satchel open with his boot. A scatter of cartridges clinked like teeth. He sighted on the muzzle flash of the freckled boy, one round close enough to cut the boy's hat off, and the kid dropped his rifle and ran for the dark. The rest fanned out, boots crunching, spurs shrilling like crickets. Nalin clawed at the knots behind her wrists until blood warmed her fingers. A shadow loomed, a ranch hand with a bowie knife and a grin, and suddenly Ezra was between them up close, the heel of his palm slamming the man's wrist. The knife skittered across the ground. Ezra hit him twice in the ribs, and once in the throat with the same practiced compassion he used to knock a calf still before a clean brand. The man folded, wheezing. Run, Ezra told Nalin. Where? Toward the creek. Then right. She hesitated, her shoulders heaving, the turquoise bead rising and falling like a beacon. Who are you? Someone who rides worse when he watches people hang. She ran, bare feet flashing pale, and every step ground sand and splinters into her heels. The creek's damp breath met her face. Reeds sliced at her calves. Behind her, the world became a hive of gunshots. Sparks lifted from flint on iron. A bullet zipped past her ear. She felt the wind of it like a moth's wing. She stumbled, fell to her knees, and the cold seeped up her shins like fear. Ezra backed toward the water, laying down shots that shoved men behind trees and sent others crawling. Pike moved like a panther through the dark, calm, economical. He reached the fallen lantern, relit it with a sulfur match, and raised it high. The light stung Ezra's pupils. He flinched a fraction, and that was enough. Pike fired. Ezra's shoulder lurched. Hot iron chewed into him and burned. He grunted and kept moving. Cole, Pike called. I know you. Army scout. Doctor when it suits you. This ain't your fight. I'm fixing the country you broke. His voice was steady as a metronome. You bring her back now and maybe we call it even. Ezra slid into the reeds where Nalin crouched, shivering. He pressed his bleeding shoulder to the cool mud and met her eyes. When I say go, you go. There's a ravine to the right with a choke of mesquite. We'll make for it. He pulled a small knife from his boot and sawed at her wrist bindings. Stay low, she nodded. Her breath feathered his cheek. Pike lifted the lantern higher and began to walk their way. Go, Ezra whispered. They went. They ran through the creek, cold water closing around their ankles with a gasp. The reeds hissed, cattails shivered, and frogs splashed into black pockets. Ezra's blood mingled thinly with river water and trailed behind like an invitation. Shots cracked and chewed bark above their heads. A bullet thudded into the bank near Nalin's hand and puffed dirt into her eyes. She swallowed a cry and kept moving, fingers tracing Ezra's sleeve. They reached the ravine, a jagged seam in the earth, walls lipped with rock and snarled with mesquite. Ezra shoved Nalin through a split in the thorns, then followed, branches scratching his coat, barbs snagging his hat brim. He breathed through the pain. The wound gnawed at him with hot teeth. They slid down a shale slope, to a shelf sheltered by leaning boulders. The world narrowed to their ragged breaths and the sound of boots above, crunching on gravel. Nalin seized his shoulder. You're hurt. I've been worse, he said, and pulled a bandage from the satchel. He gripped his belt knife in his teeth and cut the bandage in half, though I won't brag about it when my arm quits listening. He wrapped the wound tight, fingers slick, then pressed his palm against the bandage till his jaw unclenched. Listen to me. Pike doesn't quit. He hunts like a man counting debts. There's a dry wash south that opens to the old adobe mission. We make it there, we can hold. Why are you helping me? She asked, voice low. "You do not know me." Ezra looked at the slope above them, at the pale moonlit blades of grass. He thought of a fire long ago, a farmhouse, a woman with a laugh like rain. He thought of a child's hand, small in his, slipped away by fever while a surgeon shrugged. "I-O," he said simply. And because he thinks rope is law, boots slid on grit. A barrel nose winked above the rocks, and Ezra yanked Nalin down as the shot smashed stone and sang their ears hollow. He fired back and heard a shout and a clatter. Pike's men fanned, their silhouettes breaking the ridge like black teeth. "Cole," Pike's voice rolled down. "Throw your pistol up." "You'll never find a doctor in time." Ezra smiled without mirth. "Lucky I brought one." Nalin touched the turquoise bead at her throat. "I can move quiet," she whispered. "There is a game trail behind the mesquite that skirts the ridge. I have run it since I was small. If I draw them—" "You don't draw wolves unless you're the moon," Ezra said. "I am not the moon," she said, eyes hard. "But I can be smoke." Before he could stop her, she crawled into the tangle, shoulders dipping, hair snagging like night on thorns. She slid between stones and vanished. Ezra bit a curse and counted breaths. Above, someone shouted, "There! She's moving!" And 3 pairs of boots thundered off to the south ridge. Pike didn't move. He was the stillness between beats. "She runs," he called, "and I cut your time in half." Ezra lifted the Colt and laid the barrel along his forearm. "You'll have to come down here and shake me by the collar." Silence. Then the click of a rifle half-cocking. Ezra traced the sound, felt the air bend, and fired at the space where a shoulder should be. The scream told him he'd been right. He scrambled sideways to a new hollow as return fire chewed the shale he'd just left. The wound flared. His hands shook once, then steadied. Nalin's shape appeared on the far ledge, a wave of hair the curve of her cheek, then vanished again. Her footsteps drifted in the scrub, light as breeze. A stone clattered somewhere the other direction. Pike swore under his breath, and that was when Ezra heard it. The creak again, rushing louder, as if the night had shifted its weight. A flash of lightning. Distant, a low growl of thunder rolling over the mesas. Rain coming. Mud and chaos. If they didn't move, the ravine would flood like a sluice gate. Ezra gathered himself to climb, to find her before the sky did, and a shadow detached from the rock at his back. The barrel in his ribs was cold as creek iron. "Drop it!" a voice hissed. Ezra let the Colt fall into the dust. He lifted his hands, palms sticky with his own blood. The man behind him was thick-necked, breath sour as old coffee. A second man slid into view, boots whispering on grit, eyes shifty. Pike came last, lantern high, rain beading on the brim of his hat. He surveyed Ezra's bandage and nodded, almost courteous. "You fight tidy," Pike said. "Shame it's for the wrong side." Ezra shrugged with one shoulder. "Which side's that?" "The side that takes what it wants," Pike said. He tilted the lantern so its light raked Ezra's face, then the ravine behind. "Your Apache girl ran. She'll circle back to her people. They'll come with knives. Knives don't stop a dam or the desert." His voice softened, a preacher at a grave. "Men die in this country so that other men can drink. That is the Sand's law." "The Sand never swore on a Bible," Ezra said. Pike's mouth tightened. "Kill him and fetch the girl," he told the thick-necked man. The thunder said no. It came down like a shaken sheet, rain spitting, then pouring. The ravine turned to a throat-gurgling water. The lantern hissed and went out, and darkness rushed in, sudden as a cave. The man with the shotgun swore, shifted, and in that blind second Ezra moved. He drove his elbow back into the thick neck, felt cartilage give, wrenched the shotgun sideways. It boomed into the sky, white fire. Ezra kicked an ankle, swept a knee, rolled beneath a flailing arm. Hands grabbed for his coat. He shrugged them like bad dreams and dove for the place where his Colt had fallen. Fingers found walnut. He turned and fired by sound. A grunt, a curse, a body falling. Lightning stitched the sky, showed Pike on the ledge with his own revolver steady and eyes like ice. "Cole." And Pike fired. The bullet caught Ezra's hat brim, spun it from his head and stung his scalp. Ezra dropped to a crouch, breath hot in his chest, and the water rolled over his boots like a hungry thing. The rain was a drum now. The ravine sang. He crawled behind a boulder, iron taste in his mouth, and felt the world tilt toward flood. "Nalin!" He shouted into the storm. "Here!" Her voice knifed the water. She slid down from the mesquite like a wren. A rifle, short, old, well-loved, cradled to her chest. Mud painted her calves, hair streaming, eyes clear and bright. She dropped beside him, breathing hard. "My uncle's. He taught me when I was 10. "Good man," Ezra said. Pike's silhouette moved on the ridge. "I'll drown you both," he shouted, his voice ragged with the weather. "And I'll pull your bodies out of the silt and hang you again just to make the point." "Point's dull," Ezra called back. They had seconds. The water pooled deeper, tugging at their knees. Nalin pressed the rifle to her shoulder, cheek to the dark wood, and watched the place where lightning last made Pike a scarecrow against the sky. Ezra counted heartbeats. The rain blurred sight and turned sound into ghosts. "Nalin," he said, "on 3. She nodded, eyes on the ridge. 1. He closed the bleeding shoulder into himself. 2. Thunder walked across the world. 3. He rose and fired at the flash, Pike's second shot. Nalin's rifle cracked in the same breath. There was a sound like someone dropping a bag of nails, and Pike's revolver skittered from his hand. He staggered. For a moment he stood, arms out, a black cross against a white sky. Then he fell, rocks grating, and the ravine took him, water and stone and night swallowing him whole. The remaining men broke. Some scrambled upslope. Others slid again, curses torn a mile thin by the rain. The thick-necked man clutched his ruined nose and crawled into a thorn. In minutes the ravine belonged to water. Ezra and Nalin fought upstream, hip-deep, hands locked, boots dragging like anchors. They hauled themselves onto a clay lip and lay there, gasping, the rain washing blood and dirt from their faces. The storm spent itself by inches, like a fist unclenching. Dawn split the clouds with a thin yellow knife. They sat up, coughing, and looked at each other in the new light. Ezra tipped his head toward the south. "Missions that way. I can stitch myself better, and there'll be beans if the friars have any mercy left." He studied her face, the bruise fading on her jaw, the determined square of her mouth. "After, I'll ride with you to the river. We'll talk to your people. If there's a better dam to build, I know a little about moving water without breaking the land." "You would do this?" she asked. "I would try," he said. "Trying is how I make peace with ghosts." She touched his bandage, gentle as a prayer. "If I asked you to stay," she said softly, "to help us speak to the men who speak only in fences, would you?" He looked out at the wet morning, at the silt-brown ribbon of creek and the half-drowned tracks of men who thought the world stopped at their boots. He thought of the rope creaking and the coin flash of her bead in the lantern light. "I'm not much good at staying," he said, "but I am better at leaving than I want to be." He met her eyes and smiled, weary and real. "Maybe that's something I can change." A hawk rose from the cottonwood, shook itself and arrowed for the brightening east. In the distance, a cluster of riders hesitated on the ridge, men from Pike's spread, uncertain without their engine. They turned their horses and melted into the day. Nalin stood, the river wringing her dress at the hem. She offered Ezra her hand. "Come, Ezra Cole," she said, voice low. "There are beans to bargain for, wounds to clean, and water to teach how to behave." He took her hand and rose, shoulder aching, heart unexpectedly light. They walked toward the mission, boots squelching and crunching where gravel began. Behind them, the ravine murmured like a secret finally told. Above them, the hawk drew a thin arc across the newborn blue. At the mission's busted gate, Ezra paused and looked back once more at the land that always wanted to take more than it gave. Maybe the sand had its own laws. But people did too. You could choose them. You could write them again when the old ones led only to rope and mud. He turned to Nalin. "One thing," he said. "What?" "If you ever tell this story," he said, half a smile returning, "tell it plain. Tell them you freed yourself." She tilted her head. "And the man with the gray beard who shot the rope? Tell them he learned something about staying." She nodded. "Then we have both been saved." They stepped through the gate and into the cool shadow of the chapel. The world briefly hushed, like a breath taken before the next sentence. In a land where men write laws with fences and rope, mercy can redraw a map that violence cannot. If you were in Nalin's place, balance a life on a creaking rope and a stranger's aim, would you run, fight, or try to change the river itself? If this story gripped you, like the noose gripped the night, like this story and subscribe for the next Wild West tale. And if you want to see how the next battle unfolds, don't miss the next story. Subscribe now.